Hello and welcome to Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to your pickleball improvement. This is the podcast that puts your mind at the center of your game. I am the host of your weekly podcast, Tony Roy. It's a pleasure to be with you. This is episode 235 of the podcast. This week, we're going to talk about the learning space. It's a really interesting way of thinking about your journey as a pickleball player and dealing with the most common feeling that we have, which is frustration. And when we're in the learning space, I think you're going to find it really interesting. Before we dive into the podcast, I'm going to repeat the favorite from the last episode, which is if you know a player out there who's on a journey of improvement, someone who's, maybe feeling like there's more to the game than they're able to connect with right now. We have a boot camp coming up right now in March, which I think will really connect with them and help them improve in their sport. It's a super reasonably priced podcast or boot camp, and then if they like that, then they can join us for our upcoming TPS course. So that's the plan. So if you can help us reach players like you who are interested in more than just hitting the ball when they're out there on the court, we would appreciate that. All right, so let's talk about this learning space idea. So I came across this video, and that's actually one of the reasons I like sometimes just flowing through videos, because I wasn't looking for this, the idea, and I came across it was a psychologist speaking at Duke, and she was talking about how she basically had two dots on a board, and one dot was not knowing, and the other dot was knowing. Now, this could apply to anything. In our case, we're using it for pickleball, but it could apply to anything that you don't know, so not knowing, and you want to get over to knowing. And then she had this kind of a squiggly line between the two dots, kind of up and down. And then, so the focus was on the space between knowing and not knowing, the squiggly line. What is that? So she calls that the learning space. And what's really interesting about that idea is that it puts a name on something, right? That we know what we're doing, but we're not clear on what's happening. Kind of like when you play pickleball, right? You have the baseline and you have the non-volley zone line. Well, we call the space in the middle either transition zone or no man's land, something like that, to give it so that we can understand that it has a name, right? It's not just like blue court or red court or whatever color it is in your facility. So this area between not knowing and knowing is the learning space. And what she said, when you're in the learning space, there's one feeling or one emotion, and only one emotion that's associated with anyone whenever you're in the learning space. And that one feeling, that one emotion is frustration. That's the natural state when you're in this learning space. So if you think about it for a second, right? You say, okay, I don't know something. And in this case, it's pickleball, right? Or I don't know it the way I want to know it. So I want to go from not knowing to knowing. I'm going to be traversing this space, this transition zone called the learning space. And the emotion that I'm going to be feeling during this time is frustration, right? So I expect frustration when I'm in the learning space. And she continued to expound on that some, basically saying that the persons who are able to grow the most, right? Persons who are able to continue on their journeys the furthest are those who are able to withstand frustration, right? The persons who are able to just dive in and say, you know what? I'm embracing the frustration, right? There's a saying, embrace the suck, if you will. So basically, I'm just embracing the feeling of being frustrated, and I know that it's fine because it's necessary for me to progress from not knowing to knowing. The more you're able to do that, right? The more you're able to either accept it or resist it, however you want to think about it. But the more you're able to stay in that middle zone between not knowing and knowing, the more you'll grow, in this case as a pickleball player, but also in life, right? The more you're willing to put up with frustration or just accept it, right? If you want to be more Buddhist about it, you're just kind of like, oh, that's the state of now, and it is what it is, right? You can do a stoic approach, a nihilistic approach, whatever you want, right? But at the bottom line is, it's not bucking. Don't buck frustration, right? Avoid the temptation to get upset about being frustrated, to be disappointed that you're frustrated, to feel bad that you're frustrated. In fact, if you think about it big picture, it's the opposite, right? You should embrace frustration. You should say, not only am I not upset that I'm frustrated, I'm excited that I'm frustrated. Because if I'm frustrated, what I know is what? I'm in the learning space, right? If I'm frustrated, what I know is I am moving from not knowing closer to knowing, right? If I'm frustrated, I'm moving forward towards what I want. There are the puppies. So the puppies are active right now, and so you might hear them in the background a little bit. That's Bonita and Olivia. Every once in a while, they're pretty quiet dogs. They don't bark a lot, but every once in a while, they get a little excited about something. But so frustration is not only not bad, frustration is a positive because we're moving forward. And what I would suggest to you is the more you work this through, the more you understand that it's a permanent state. And allow me to explain this to you. So right now we have two dots, not knowing and knowing. And we're looking at the space in between as a learning space. And then we're talking about frustration being the natural feeling in that space. But here's the thing. As I go from not knowing to knowing, as long as I'm still curious, as long as I still want to grow, that not knowing dot continues to slide, right? Because, and let's make it simple. Let's start at the beginning. So let's say that you just started playing pickleball and you don't know how to keep score. Frustrating if you remember, right? It's kind of like, I can't remember how to keep score. So I don't know how to keep score. And then there's knowing how to keep score. And in the middle, learning space, frustration. Okay, now I know how to keep score, but I don't really understand the strategy for what to do in my return to serve. So I'm back into a not knowing knowing and a not knowing knowing and a not knowing knowing. Right now, you have a not knowing knowing gap. If you're, curious and want to grow, you have a not knowing gap between where you are and where you want to be. And that continuously slides. Right? There is no end point in pickleball unless you decide. The only end point in pickleball is when you say to yourself, "I'm done growing." And don't take this the wrong way. It's not a adjudication that you're a bad person or that it's perfectly fine. You're entitled to engage with the sport however you want. I would submit to you that personally, whether it's inside or outside of pickleball, I would suggest it's more fulfilling to engage in this life with a constant growth idea, with a never, always, there's this idea of always thinking yourself as a beginner in everything, right? I'm always like looking at it as I'm new to this. What can I continue to grow in, right? As a person. I think pickleball is a great place to do that. Think about it like a canvas for yourself. And we've talked about it a little bit before, but just don't lose sight of that, right? Pickleball is a great space that allows you to work on yourself physically, socially, emotionally, mentally, everything. And actually the way a recent interview with a pro player, Richard Livernese, he talked about it like basically it gives him more reps. Let's say you're playing pickleball 4 or 5 times a week, right? There's going to be plenty of places there for you to work on your mental journey because you're going to have so many different exposures to potentially adverse mental reactions, right? You missed a shot. You lost a game you should have won. Whatever you're thinking, right? All these different things are different repetitions that you have that allow you to continue to strengthen your mental journey muscles, right? Your ability to deal with those situations. Whereas if you remove that, right? So let's say you weren't playing those pickleball games, and let's go completely the other way, completely sedentary lifestyle, sitting on the couch watching television. There's no adversity, right? Other than, maybe once a month or something, you're looking back on like, what did I do last month? But other than that, I mean, like during day in and day out, you're just kind of receiving information. There's nothing, whatever. So these pressures that pickleball creates for us allow us to continue to get the reps, to continue to work on our mental processes inside the game, but also outside the game. So as you work forward, right, from not knowing to knowing, understanding that those are always going to be moving goalposts as long as you are open to that, and understanding that the space between them, this learning space, is a learning space, is an area that when you're transiting it, it's going to be characterized by feelings of frustration, then what happens is you can embrace the frustration, right? And definitely, at least don't fight the frustration, right? Don't get upset about the frustration. Just embrace it. And then you'll continue to grow as a person, knowing that your frustration is a necessary piece to your growth from not knowing to knowing, which will improve your pickleball and, more importantly, will improve your life. So hopefully this helps you navigate not just pickleball, but also outside of pickleball in terms of any kind of growth process that you are engaged with, as long as you remain open to growth. That's this week's podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have a minute to rate and review it, fantastic. And as always, if you can share it with your friends, great. Because remember, if you enjoyed the podcast, they probably will too. I hope you have a great weekend and week, and I will see you at the next episode of Pickleball Therapy. Be well.